Imagine if China spent decades influencing Canadian culture and politics until one day they elected a corrupt fascist puppet government that was hostile towards American interests and national security. Now combine that with the Cuban Missile Crisis and 1,000 years of shared ethnic, cultural, and religious development. And imagine, if you will, that Canada had helped us repel countless foreign invasions over the centuries by sacrificing their land and people for our very survival. Even if all that were true, Ukraine would still be more important to Russia than Canada would be to us. Hello everyone, I'm Bobtheorc, and let's try and explain what's going on in Ukraine. Before we get started, if you like this kind of stuff, please like and share this video. Hopefully I can give you some useful information. I have traveled quite a bit in that region to both Ukraine and Russia, and I have friends from both countries. And I think I've got a bit of a unique perspective. So I'm going to try and break this down to you in sort of a condensed version. There's a lot of details I'll leave out, but I'm trying to give you guys the important part. So, first off, I don't think this is World War III. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain it's not World War III. This is important regionally, but not that important on the global scale. In fact, I would dare say that this would rank maybe about a 3 or a 4 on my on a scale of 1 to 10 for things that I'm really concerned about, and I'll tell you why. So, first off, if you look at the map, in these areas here in orange, this is the far eastern part of Ukraine, and Putin has had troops in eastern Ukraine since probably about 2014. If you recall, there was some rioting, and there was some funny business that happened, and you had some various spontaneous revolutions and separatist movements and whatnot. And the troops, according to my Ukrainian friends, most of the troops that are going into Ukraine have already been there for a long time, and Putin's just simply admitting that he has control over this region. He's just making it official. And I'll get into some of that in a little while. So I don't think this is going to be World War III. Now, never underestimate the stupidity of Western diplomacy. Our leaders are really dumb when it comes to this kind of stuff, and Russia's traditionally good at diplomatically punching above its weight class. So we could end up doing something really stupid, but I don't think so. I don't think even Biden's that dumb. So let's see what happens here. But I'm going to try and break this down. The first thing that's really important to understand is the ties between Ukraine and Russia go back like over 1,000 years. In fact, the ethnic Russian people come from this region. Ukraine and Russia area, if you go back far enough in history, this is where the European Russian people are from. Now, Russia is a very diverse, racially diverse country, and with a lot of different Asian people in it, and the predominantly European Russians are from the Ukraine and Western Russian area. So Ukraine has been part of Russia for most of recent history, for probably the last 1,000 years, in one form or another. They've been very close. So imagine a relationship in many ways much like the U.S. and Canada, probably closer for most of history, and it wasn't until the fall of the Soviet Union that Ukraine really kind of separated. Now that's an oversimplification. There's been conflicts, and there's been back and forth, but the short version is they're pretty tight historically, and you can't underestimate the strategic and economic importance of Ukraine, especially eastern Ukraine. During the Soviet era, much of the Russian technology and industry or the Soviet technology and industry was based in eastern Ukraine. It's a industrialized region. Western Ukraine is mostly farmland. It is a vastly rich a country with natural resources, plagued by typical Eastern European corruption. So that's the first thing to understand. This is really, really important. There's no way to. It cannot be overstated how important Ukraine is to Russia. In a variety of profound ways. So, if we look at religion, something important to understand is that the Orthodox Church, Eastern Orthodoxy or Orthodox Christianity, while originally based in Constantinople, when that fell to the Turks, to the Ottoman Empire, in many ways the center of Orthodox Christianity moved to Russia, and there's the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, it's all Orthodox Christianity, but the Orthodox in Russia are more zealous. They're more hardcore about it. And if you look at Ukraine is mostly Orthodox. You've got some Polish Catholic in the West, but most of Ukraine, especially in the East, is Orthodox Christian. And it's difficult to stress just how important this is, especially to the older generations of Russians. And if you look at a lot of the motivations behind Putin draws a lot of his philosophy from Alexander Dugin, which is he's sort of an interesting fellow, kind of a conservative, quasi-fascist, traditionalist kind of guy, and Putin was sort of a closet Orthodox Christian during the Soviet era, back when it was not allowed to be, when you weren't allowed to be Christian. Putin, my understanding is Putin takes that shit pretty seriously. He's pretty hardcore. And in many ways, he views Russia as the savior of Eastern Christianity. And one thing to keep in mind is that in many ways, Russia politically is similar to a medieval feudal system. In feudal times, in medieval times, the king still needed the support of the lords and the church in order to maintain power. And Putin needs the support of the oligarchs as well as the Orthodox Church in order to maintain his control. In a Western society, in Western politics, your politicians need the support of the media largely in order to retain power. Whereas in Russia, since everybody knows that the media is propagandized, the church has the moral authority, since Russia in many ways is a much more traditional society. And so that's really important to understand. And while there's a lot of problems between Ukraine and Russia right now, Ukraine really wants to be its own neutral, independent country. Especially among the younger generation, they see Ukraine as being the Switzerland of the East, where they want to be the economic bridge between the East and the West. The older generation, this may not be quite the case, and certainly for some of the older generation in Russia, they see Ukraine as their Orthodox brothers, and there is a profound importance to that. Whenever you hear about Christians being killed in the Middle East, those are Orthodox Christians, and so the Orthodox Christians take that pretty seriously. So let's take a look. Let's go way back to I believe 2010 or so. So now, a long time ago, actually, we'll go back a little bit before that. So, at the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union fell and their comprising states broke apart, Ukraine was very powerful. Ukraine had nuclear weapons. They had a lot of the Russian military, the Soviet military were Ukrainian, and they essentially made a deal that they would give Russia back the nuclear weapons, and in exchange, Russia would provide their security. Ukraine and Russia were tight. Now, over time, now we agreed, we being the West, we agreed that Ukraine would not be part of NATO, that we would not expand NATO, which we, of course, lied about, and that Ukraine and the the ex-Soviet satellite states would remain a neutral buffer zone between the East and the West. And obviously we didn't hold up to that. The European Union ended up taking in a number of these countries. NATO ended up taking in a number of these countries, and that made Russia really nervous. It would be like if Canada and Mexico became military allies of China. That would make us uncomfortable. The distance between Ukraine and Russia, you could put nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and it would be a similar distance to Moscow as missiles in Cuba were to the East Coast. You'd have 5-10 minutes of warning, and then everybody'd be dead. So strategically, this is really important to the Russians, and Putin, in many ways, many of the Russians tell me that Putin is still in somewhat of a Cold War mentality. I don't know how true that is, because it's mostly the younger ones telling me that. I think he's probably using that more as a propaganda to try and retain his power, because Russia has a lot of economic problems right now, and so I think he's trying to do. I think a lot of this is just trying to bolster his political support. But Putin does seem to enjoy a legitimate majority of support in Russia. Not so much because the people love him, but because the alternatives aren't really any better. And so I would guess that he probably legitimately has like a 55 to 60% support. I don't have any hard figures on that. That's just from talking to people when I was in Russia. That would be roughly my guess. So if you look at, over time, we the West started meddling in Ukraine's politics and culture. One of the reasons we won the Cold War is because Western culture, especially American culture, is pervasive. People like the idea of freedom and opportunity, and a lot of the values that we in the West are starting to forget, the people in Eastern Europe have fallen in love with. And so the Ukrainians I've met are generally very entrepreneurial. Most of the Eastern Europeans I've met are pretty entrepreneurial, and at least the younger ones. So as we start moving away from the Cold War, and the post-Cold War Russia was a mess. The oligarchs grabbed up all of the resources. They did not make a smooth transition. Let's put it that way. Towards about 2010, you had Yanukovych became elected, and you can tell by the map that the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine mostly voted for Yanukovych, and the western parts of Ukraine voted for his opponent. There's questions about the election, but it's Eastern Europe, so there's always questions about the election. But Yanukovych was generally pro-Russian, and which is typical because Ukraine is typically a pro-Russian country. Now, towards about 2012 or so, Obama gets in, and we start seeing a shift in foreign policy towards Ukraine, where we started screwing with them a bit. You know, I have friends who, you know, told me that European bankers were offering money for them to participate in riots and protests. We were definitely trying to break Ukraine away from Russia and bring them more into the EU. And when I say we, I mean we, the West, not specifically America, although generally speaking, all of the stuff that you may or may not have heard about the Biden corruption, the Hunter Biden stuff, the Joe Biden stuff, the Burisma, all that stuff is basically all true. And it's been common knowledge in Ukraine for a long time that the Americans and some of the Europeans are in bed with some of the Ukrainian oligarchs. It's very corrupt. There's a lot of money floating around, and it's pretty dirty. So we essentially staged a coup. We staged a revolt and got rid of the elected official. You know, I say elected in quotes because, like I said, there was funny business in the elections, but that's typical for this region. So we got rid of the guy, and that sort of freaked Putin out. We created a lot of instability in Ukraine in order to do it, and Putin, being an opportunist, took advantage of that instability, and he grabbed up Crimea down here, which Crimea has been a Russian naval base for a long time. It's their warm water port. I cannot overstate the strategic importance of the naval base in Crimea. And when Putin says that they basically voted to secede from Ukraine and join Russia, there's enough Russian naval personnel there and enough families of Russian military. It might actually be true. If nothing else, it was not difficult for Russia to take that over because they already had their military there. They just simply had to say, okay, well, you guys are staying with us now. And in eastern Ukraine, you know, they sent in a bunch of separatists and whatnot, or, you know, they sent in paramilitary. They did some funny business. And my understanding is from talking to some of my international arms dealer friends, I guess would be the technically correct way to put it. The conflict is largely between, you know, you've got the Ukrainian oligarchs and Ukrainian mob fighting Russian oligarchs and Russian mob. One of my buddies claims that because the Ukrainian government is so corrupt, the real war is being managed out of a back room of a bar in Kiev, some mobster bar. I don't know if that's actually true. I've never been there and seen it for myself, but it wouldn't surprise me. And my Ukrainian friends do say that the Ukrainian oligarchs do spend billions of dollars supporting their own private armies. And that I did see. I saw some paramilitary back in, I guess, 2014 when I was there. So it's not cut and dry. You know, there's been fighting in Ukraine for a long time. Now, if we want to take it one step forward, if you look at the language, the native Russian language speakers tends to match up quite perfectly with the political alignment. You know, what do you know? Native Russians vote for the Russian guy. Ukrainians vote for the, you know, non-Russian guy. Even though, you know, Ukrainians and Russians are genetically basically the same. But you can see in the same areas that you have the conflict, they're generally native Russian speakers, and in this other area to the west, generally native Ukrainian speakers. The difference between Ukrainian and Russian is kind of like the difference between British English and American English. or at worst, the difference between like British English and Cajun. You can kind of understand it. If you speak one, you can understand the other. And, Ukrainian seems to be a little bit softer and more gentle of a language than Russian. Russian's a little bit harsher, I guess, although that's not really a good way to describe it. I can kind of tell the difference when I hear it, but I couldn't explain it to you what the difference is. My Ukrainian and Russian friends could do a better job of that. But it's two distinct languages that are very, very similar. So, in many ways, this isn't as big of a deal because, like I said before, Putin's mainly just acknowledging troops that he already has in these regions, and the regions that he's taking is generally already pro-Russian. So you could almost call this a civil war rather than an invasion, and that would not be inaccurate, although it would be a civil war essentially caused by foreign meddling. And if I had to assign blame, I would say that we in the West actually were the catalyst to start this. By breaking our original agreements, we gave Putin the opportunity. I'm not saying that Putin's not to blame. I'm saying that we fucked up and we gave him the opportunity. It's like leaving your Porsche unlocked in the bad part of town and going away for a week. Yeah, somebody's going to steal it. So let's consider the fact that, especially here in America, we have a long history of being terrible at foreign policy. Our neocons, and I consider both the Democrats and Republicans to have their share of neocons. They love screwing things up. And a lot of them are just really corrupt. I'm gonna throw a bunch of them under the bus. Just pick your politician. The Bidens have strong ties to Ukraine and Chinese money. Mitch McConnell has a bunch of ties to Chinese money. Hillary supposedly Ukraine and Middle Eastern money. Probably Chinese as well, because Bill opened up China and basically handed them the keys to American investment. I mean, all these guys are corrupt. The Bushes, all these assholes. They're all terrible when it comes to foreign policy, and they're so corrupted by their foreign influence that they make really obvious mistakes. So here's what I think is going to happen. Here's what I think's going on. Now, if you look here, you've got the Dnieper River. This is a really big river. This is kind of like the Mississippi River, bigger in some areas, okay? This river is big. I've seen it, and it is big. I don't see any situation where Putin crosses the Dnieper River. It's not practical. Keep in mind that Russia has an economy smaller than that of New York State. It used to be smaller than California, and now it's smaller than New York State. We sort of opened the door for this when Biden approved the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Trump had shut it down. That was actually good. And the reason it was good is because Russia makes a lot of money supplying gas to Europe. And the Russian gas pipelines go through Ukraine. And so if Russia screws with Ukraine, Ukraine could turn off the gas and financially screw Russia. When Biden approved the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is now complete, that opened the door for Russia to pull more funny business in Ukraine. This is the same reason why under the Obama and Hillary era, that they were so big on trying to do all the bullshit in Syria, because they were trying to screw Russia out of their pipeline by working with with the Middle East to go and send natural gas and oil, through Syria, which is why they had to create the civil war in Syria, which is another Russian ally. So we keep screwing with Russian allies, and then we're surprised when Russia screws with us back. I'm not saying that Russia's a good guy, but we're certainly not being smart about this. Our politicians are stupid, are really, really stupid, like criminally stupid. You guys should just vote them all out. I don't care which party they're in, vote them all the fuck out, because they are screwing up the balance of the world. And they're getting rich in the process too. But that's a topic for another video. So now that Russia doesn't need the Ukrainian pipeline, they can pull their funny business. Now, realistically, Putin's not going to go too far. He's certainly not going to go past the Dnieper River, because that would be impractical, and they don't have the logistic capability to do that. Now, what's really going to happen, I think he's just going to secure the areas that he already owns. Russia basically already secures, already basically owns the east, and maybe he'll try and connect a land route to Crimea, although he doesn't really have to. What you'll probably see over the course of time is you'll see Putin secure what he's got, and then more separatist movements slowly encroach westward over time. And keep in mind, Putin can afford to play the long game. If you look at it strategically, the degradation of society in the West, from the Duginist point of view, which is popular among some of the more hardcore older Russians, they see the West as corrupt, which it is. They see the West as decadent, which it is. They see the West as losing their connection with God, which it is. And if nothing else, Europe is becoming more and more Muslim because of birth rates. And the Catholic Church, as it becomes more woke, is starting to alienate some of the Eastern European Catholics, like the Polish Catholics, who are more conservative than Western Catholics. So one long play that Putin could do is, if he establishes himself as a protector of Christianity, of at least Eastern Christianity, over time you're going to see Russian Orthodox people and probably conservative Catholics start to migrate away from the Western sphere of influence to the Eastern sphere of influence. I think the strategic alliance between Russia and China is temporary. I think that's just a alliance of convenience, because Russia needs economic support in case we impose all these sanctions. It's in Russia's best interest to get rid of the U.S. petrodollar, and become independent from the SWIFT banking system. So you're going to see a lot of these moves, and Russia's trying to trying to grab up the people who are already predisposed towards Russia. And that's not necessarily a stupid move from Putin's point of view. He's not going to be aggressive overtly, as these regions become independent. Like I said, he views Ukraine as a civil war, and as these regions become independent, he'll recognize them as independent nations and offer military alliances, and then probably eventually annex them into Russia when they, in some time in the future, vote to join Russia, or at least become satellite states. So, in many ways, with Europe having problems and America having problems, Putin mostly just has to survive and bide his time, because Ukraine's not that important to us. It's a lot more important to Russia than it is to America. So he's going to play a long game, I think. There's not going to be a World War III. Now, culturally speaking, the younger Russians, the internet generation, have more in common with the West, with America, for example. And I don't think Putin understands that. One of my friends likes to joke that Putin doesn't know what YouTube is. And that might be true. that might be, true. Putin's kind of an old school guy. He plays sports. He's very physical. He rides bears through the mountains. I mean, not really, but you get the point. So I think in many ways he is a relic of the past, and he is going to have a hard time finding a successor. Putin's getting older. He's not old yet, but he's, I can't imagine Putin has more than 20 more years in him ruling Russia. And he's going to have a hard time finding a successor. So our best strategy that we have as Americans is we want to build up cultural ties with Russia and Eastern Europe. Eastern Europeans and Russians especially really like Americans, the people. We have a lot in common. We're culturally very similar. We both hate our governments, and at least hate the corruption in our governments. And, we both have an optimism and an entrepreneurial spirit that that brings us together. There's a I've always found Russians and Ukrainians and Poles, Eastern Europeans in general, to be very easy to get along with. Maybe it's because I grew up with a lot of them in New York City, but as I've traveled that part of the world, there's always a lot in common. And even when I travel elsewhere, I was in London a few years back, and all the Romanians were wearing Yankees baseball hats because the Yankees are cool, man. At least that's what they said. So our long game is we really want to make sure that Russia eventually aligns itself with the United States and not with China. We don't want China and Russia to ever be tight for any long period of time. And we could create a situation. I don't think Biden can do it because Biden screwed up too much and Putin has no respect for him. Trump might have been able to do that, although there was no political unity under Trump, and so I don't think the Democrats and even half the Republicans wouldn't have gone with it. But at some point within the next 10 or 20 years, we need to try and strategically align ourselves with Russia, especially as we start looking outward to space and look at a more global society. We want them in our sphere of influence, because culturally we are becoming culturally closer together. We won the Cold War because of economics and culture, not because of military power. I mean, yes, we bankrupted their country by making them spend a lot on military, but the real taking down the Berlin Wall was a cultural victory. And many of our ancient dinosaur politicians don't realize that. They're still trapped in the Cold War era. Biden's trapped in the Cold War just as much as Putin is. So I don't think there's going to be a war, not on a large scale, not unless we start it. I think that the American neocons are the only people who actually want to scale up a war in Ukraine. Putin's going to play this very chill. He knows he's already won. The victory was assured back in 2014, and I think that he put his plans on hold during Trump, because let's face it, Trump's kind of a crazy motherfucker. Putin wasn't really sure what he'd do. But once Biden came in and was back to kind of the traditional neocon politics business as usual, and especially after we screwed up the Afghanistan withdrawal, Biden knew that it was back to business as usual, and Biden would probably play out of the Obama playbook, the Bush playbook, and he knows that game. He's very good at that game. So I would advise everybody stay calm. It's not going to get too bad. I do think Putin's going to take territory, but it's not going to be a hard grab. It's going to be more of a I don't want to say a soft power grab, because that's not right either. But it's going to be more in the form of an insurgency, rebellion. This is really going to look more like a civil war than a world war or international conflict. So Putin's playing the long game, and we need to play the long game too, and we need to stop screwing up with our foreign policy. But that's a story for another time. Anyway, I hope that you guys found this helpful. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channels. Check out bobtheorc.com. Get ready for all the bad inflation that's coming, because that's the bigger problem. And don't be assholes to each other. That's Putin's job and Biden's job. They can go be assholes back and forth. But you guys love each other, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.